Thank you all for coming. My name is Daniel Caixinha, and I'm going to be talking about embracing Elixir, an adoption story. I'm a software engineer at Onfido, where I've been lucky enough to spend the past 2.5 years working with Elixir. So you can find me pretty much anywhere, except for Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. I'm just kidding, but this is my handle on GitLab, GitHub, and on the Pixel Scam Slack. So if you want to reach out later, please do, or just grab me after the talk. So starting with the motivation, so why did I create this talk? I really feel that we need to think more about business cases, and they matter. So as developers, sometimes we like to stay away from that path and like minimize the conversations we have with our managers. But I think they are really important if you want to change the way things work at your organization and have a chance to change the status quo. And I think we need to share broad lessons about adoption. I guess there's a lot of content about the technical side of adopting a new language, and I feel that there's less content on the political side of it, and like how do you manage the not so technical parts. Another important point is that Elixir, which is the top, I will describe what Elixir is, but Elixir is now a technically mature language, so the first thing that would worry the stakeholders at your company is no longer an issue nowadays. So the first thing they would be thinking about is like, is this language even going to last? Why are you talking to me about this? And nowadays, this is no longer an issue, and Elixir is here to stay. So just comparing like from 2 years ago or 3 years ago, you had like very unstable APIs. The language itself was still evolving a lot. Nowadays you have APIs that are reliable, consistent, and that you can rely upon. And also like 3 or 4 years ago, you didn't have a web framework or a DB framework. Nowadays, you have Phoenix and Ecto, which allow you to move very fast and not have to roll your own frameworks for everything. So yeah, this is a really major point. And also, one of the purposes of this talk is to get more people in the community, and the wider and more diverse community is always good. So we'll have more content being generated, more knowledge sharing, and in the end, everybody will benefit from it. So yeah, I hope to convince some of you to try it out at your companies. So what is Elixir? Just out of curiosity, a quick show of hands. Who is familiar with what Elixir is? So some of you. So I'll just do a quick introduction to Elixir so everybody's on the same page. So Elixir is a functional dynamic programming language with a syntax very similar to Ruby, but that's about where the similarities end. And it was created in 2011 by José Vali, so it's around 8 years old. And it runs on the battle-tested Erlang virtual machine, which is also commonly known as the Beam. So the Erlang was created in 1986, so it has been battle-tested for more than 3 decades now. And it's really cool that with Elixir, you can take advantage of this very stable core, which you build upon, and Elixir, building on top of it, can move fast and just rely on that stable core for the reliability of your application. So Elixir, the concurrency model of Elixir is the actor model. So basically in this model you have a lot of actors, also known as processes, interacting with each other, and each process never never shares memory with another process. So if a process A wants to change the state of process B, it has to send a message through it. So the communication is via message passing, and there is no shared memory. Basically, this is important because it will give this way of programming your applications will give you concurrency for free. This is very important nowadays because nowadays the Moore's law is no longer holding up, so we will not have processors getting twice as fast every couple of years. So we need to be smarter and use all of our cores. So the trend that we are seeing is that we'll have processors with more cores, but around the same frequency in each processor. And yeah, so it's important to have applications that make use of all of those cores, and Elixir you just gain that for free because you don't even need to think about making your application like parallel. So just a side note, these are not like operating system processes, don't confuse them. These processes that I'm talking about are like green threads, so processes managed by the Erlang VM. For instance, a newly created process in Elixir takes around 2 kilobytes of memory, whereas in Linux, a new process takes around 2 megabytes. So in Elixir, it's very easy to have like thousands or even millions of processes running in your application, each of them communicating with each other. Just wrapping up the intro of Elixir, a point that I would like to make is that usually engineering teams need to make a trade-off, need to decide on a trade-off, which is, do we want to move fast or do we want to build a scalable application? And typically startups move more towards the first. So we want to move fast, so we'll use a language that allows us to do so, like Ruby, and we'll just iterate a lot. And the big corporations want performance, so they will build their applications in a language that allows the system to scale and so on. And I really think Elixir has the best of both worlds because you have a language that allows you to move very fast because it's very developer-friendly, it has incredible tooling, and at the same time, your application will scale to, I will show you some graphs later, but your application will scale to very, very great heights. So I'm not saying, just to make myself clear, I'm not saying Elixir is a silver bullet. There are some areas, some domains where Elixir is not well suited for. But for like web applications especially, Elixir I think is a very good choice. My talk is basically merging the contents of this book with my experience at Onfido. So this book is Adopting Elixir from Concept to Production, and was written by Ben Marks, Joseph Ali, and Bruce Tate. I really recommend this book. It has a really different take on than most technical books, which focus on technical things. So this is a kind of a different book, which is why I recommend. Diving into adopting a new language, it's a very hard process to go through and decision to make. So there's this tendency that we have to work with what we already know. And this is not necessarily bad. Like sometimes it's good to use proven technology to solve a problem. But at the same time, this might be stopping you from evolving into more performant and more friendly environments. If you don't come from functional programming, in this case, you'll have a new paradigm to go through and a runtime, so you have to get familiar with all of this stuff. And this takes time and this hard. There's also the question, or where do I even start? So which part of my current monolith or old application will I carve out to migrate to Elixir in this case? So this is a major blocker as well. People just block at the beginning. And the last point is it's hard to build teams around the new language. So because since the language is new, there are no developers specific to that language, so it's hard to hire or to even train people. So I will just go through some of the quotes of the book now that highlight some of the advantages that I felt with Elixir as well. I won't read the quotes, I will just skim through the important bits. So this is a quote by Dave Marks, a senior engineer at Bleacher Report. And he said that Elixir has simplified their stack, and now they can do what they needed with third-party integrations. They now can do it with just Elixir. And from my experience, like in Ruby, I would use Sidekick or Rescue, and then Redis to back those jobs up. And with Elixir, you can just use Elixir and move forward because the language has constructs that allow you to not have to depend on those systems. Also, an interesting quote, like testing with production data and multiplying to that data to a test environment, they concluded that they can handle about 10 times their current load before any response time increases, which is really mind-boggling for me because, like, just imagine saying that to your manager or your tech leads, like, it's incredible. these are a couple of graphs. So this is the 3 days of the draft, the NFL draft in the United States. On the top is the request count, and on the bottom is the latency for that same time period. So they didn't provide the y-axis, so we don't know how many concurrent users they actually got, but they said it was more than 30,000 concurrent users accessing their application at the 29th of April. So more than 30,000 concurrent users, and you see that the latency is hovering at around 50 milliseconds and has a spike to like 100 and something milliseconds. But so it doesn't stay there; it recovers, and these are just isolated spikes of some service that needed to catch up on. But yeah, these graphs are very incredible at least to me, and from my experience that I had with other languages. So this is the most juicy slides of this talk. So if the previous slide didn't convince you, I hope this one will. So this is from Steve Cohen from Pinterest. They are also heavy users of Elixir. And he says that when he started, they were running 1,400 services. And with Elixir, they reduced that by 95%. So I did the math, and that's 70 servers from 1,400. And one of the systems ran on 200 Python servers, now running on 4 Elixir servers, and the 4 are just for fault tolerance because it could run on 2. Another interesting point is Elixir, and the combination of Elixir and better architecture saved Pinterest over $2 million per year, which is kind of incredible, but makes sense given the server savings that they had. And also, a service that was running, the notification service was running in 30 C32 instances in AWS, and in Elixir, it went on to run on 15 of those same instances. So half of it, which is, for comparing to Java, which is considered the performant language, it's really impressive as well. Development productivity matters just as much as production performance. So another point that I want to make is that in Elixir, like you have very close and tight feedback loops. So this is from Bruce Tate, one of the authors, and his test suite in Elixir runs in under 20 seconds, whereas the app that he migrated from in Ruby, the test suite ran in just under 10 minutes. So this might not seem like much because tests will just run in CI, but I think feedback cycles really matter, and this huge difference has an impact on your day-to-day productivity. So this is, feedback cycles matter a lot. This is an example of one of the most actively developed apps at Onfido, Elixir apps, and we have like 822 tests. And all this runs in 7 seconds. So when I'm developing, this is even faster because when I'm developing, I'm not running the whole test suite. So yeah, I have a very tight feedback loop, and I can just adapt as I go through. I think this is very important, particularly when your feedback loop goes over the time that gets you out of the zone. So when you do that, you'll just, like if your test suite takes 30 seconds to run, which doesn't seem like much, you just go to XKCD or the latest Hacker New post, and you break your focus a lot. And yeah, this is very important. So moving on, adopting a new language, I'll just go through the three main areas that I want to focus. So the first, how do we create this application in the new language? Then how do we ensure code consistency in this new language and try to avoid it from becoming a legacy application in the future? And team building, how do you train or hire developers for this new language? So creating your first application. So basically, my pointers for where to start are you should pick a single focus problem that's like central enough to be seen and big enough to matter. So, but at the same time, something that has room for failure, so that's small enough to allow you to fail in the beginning because you are learning a lot of things, and like Murphy is not our friend, so a lot of things will go wrong, surely. And You just want something that's big enough to have business impact, and people will get that early buy-in, but at the same time allow you to fail at least a little bit. And yeah, ideally something that has business value, because you'll just get everybody excited in the company, and you'll just move forward with it. So a quote from the book again. So Ben Martz, one of the authors, he made a little app that would fetch news articles from several sources concurrently instead of sequentially, and reduce the response times dramatically. And this took a day to prototype and solve the key business need. So again, highlighting the importance of picking the right problem to solve. So creating your first application. Where should you start, like carving out your current monolith or application? I have two main advices on this area. So either it's something that would really make use of Elixir's strength, so something that's that makes high use of parallelism, or some part of your app that is not coping with the current scale that you have, and you need it to scale further. I now have some examples of applications that we have built at Onfido that fall under these two categories. So first one, it's Heimdall. So this is the first application that we deployed to production at Onfido, and basically it makes async requests. Makes async requests look sync to the outside world. So essentially, you have an API that you want to make sync to your customers or to the consumers of your API, because that's what you promised them. But you want to move the processing downstream to an asynchronous manner. So this app would just get the request from the consumer of our API and issue the necessary asynchronous requests, gather the responses, and then communicate back to the consumer. And this was very hard to do with our previous stack, which was Ruby. For instance, if you are running Unicorn, like you can run things in parallel if you run another process. And even if you use smart stuff like copy and write and stuff like that, there's only so much processes you can run in a Ruby app. Like even if you are running 10 of those, you are already using a lot of memory, and people won't be happy with that. So your AWS will be happy, but maybe not your manager. So this is just a very short code snippet of the core of what this application is doing. So basically, we get the request, we just transform the query string parameters in such a way, and then the perform request is where we are actually sending those asynchronous requests. Then we just wait for the response and send it back. So this is very simple. Obviously, it's more complicated than this in the reality, because we need to have timeouts in place, because if some of those services don't reply in a timely manner, you need to just reply to your consumer. But the gist of it is this. So the second service is Loki. So basically, it's the Sandbox service. At Onfido, we have a bunch of reports that customers can ask for, and basically this Sandbox service is a way for them to run a report in a Sandbox environment, so they can try out their integration with us and just have a report, but one that is not live. And through metaprogramming, a new report type can be added without any coding, or almost any coding. I'll show later. But this is very important, because people that don't know Elixir and are developing other report types across the organization can just add a new report to this Sandbox service without even knowing Elixir or Elixir. And yeah, it has been so reliable, I often forget that it's there, so I don't recall any downtime that we had on this. And yeah, so just some very simple code samples. So basically on the top, we are defining a JSON template that's saying, like, we will, for a report X, in this case standard, we will reply with this JSON, and we are interpolating that template with this bit. So this is the only Elixir bit that they need to write, a map that interpolates. If the client wants a clear response, we send a score with 0.0. If they want a consider response, so basically the report can be either clear or consider, and we interpolate the value accordingly. And yeah, so the last app that I want to talk about is Imago, and this is the bit of the second point previously, where we added a part of our application which wasn't scaling, so we migrated that over to Elixir. And this service enables the download, upload of media, so photos, videos, whatever, across Onfido. And previously, the previous solution wasn't scaling, so previously we were using Paperclip, which was a Ruby gem, and it just wasn't coping with the load that we needed. So we had a lot of research people downloading a lot of images and videos at the same time. And yeah, we had memory leaks, and it was slow. The latency was really high, and it wasn't scaling. And yeah, this takes care of encryption or decryption, and interacting with S3 to put it there or download it from there, and also caching. And it's really cool because like this app was developed by one guy in 1 month, and that guy was still learning the language. And we had like caching, which is often very hard to add in normal applications, but the constructs of the language allowed us to do this in a very quick manner. So this is just a hand-drawn representation of this application done by my colleague Andre. And basically, this is what we call in Elixir an umbrella application, which is just an application that is built of another smaller and simpler application. So in this case, Imago is built of 4 applications in this case. So DB, S3, those are self-explanatory. So S3 interacts with S3 and just it's its sole responsibility and just takes care of that. DB interacts with the DB. Backend then coordinates with these two to do the things that they need from it. And then we expose this service, in this case, to the web via another application that is the API that communicates with the backend to get what it needs as well. So just some cool stats. This is the request count for the whole month of January. So 25 million downloads. This is just for downloads, so we also have uploads, but this is for downloads. 25 million requests, and this is the latency graph for that same time period. So yeah, this export didn't. You can't read the axis, but basically this is hovering at around 50 or 60 milliseconds. So, and it's being hit with a lot of requests in parallel. Yeah, it's basically, this is really what Beam is good for. It has a very predictable latency, and yeah, we just don't have any issues with it. And about memory usage, so with Paperclip, we saw a lot of memory leaks because it was handling a lot of files, so photos, videos, and so on. And we would see huge memory leaks. So this is the memory usage for that same time period. So yeah, nothing to see here. It's like hovering at around 200 something or 300 megabytes. And yeah, it's just running there for the whole month. So if you still can find a candidate after these tips, I would say, I would encourage you to try the Terraform library. So this is a bit of unfortunate naming. So do not confuse this with HashiCorp's Terraform. This is an Elixir library that's named Terraform. But basically what this allows you to do is migrate one application one endpoint at a time. So there's a saying that the only way to move a mountain is one stone at a time. So this is kind of a similar approach where you migrate one endpoint at a time. So another possibility is to extract the out system, because usually it doesn't have many dependencies with core components, and you can just take it out from there, and it's something that will benefit because it will be hit by all other applications, so it needs to scale as well. This is just a bit of code to show how would you use the Terraform library. So basically, we are matching, in this line, we are matching on GET requests. So GET requests to /v1/hello world would be handled by Elixir. So here you would do something else. I'm just sending this response back. And you'd match on every other GET requests, and you'd program this module foo, which would call back your old system. So if you can leave this as the obvious downside that you have extra latency in the process because you have one extra hop, but if you can live with that extra latency, this is a very interesting approach because you can just migrate stuff incrementally. So testing it all, just some words for testing, because that's a subject I care a lot about. Tests will allow you to have greater confidence on the migration. So And Elixir ships with a testing framework called XUnit, so it will cover most of your testing needs, I guess, and it's really, really well written. Code coverage doesn't mean a lot of it on its own, so I don't think you should strive for 100% coverage, because you can still like have 100% test coverage and just having your app blowing up in production, which is ultimately what matters. But in the case of a migration, I think test coverage tools are helpful because you can check for blind spots. You are migrating stuff, you can just run a report and see what am I missing here. And having a great test suite will also give newcomers confidence to jump in and start contributing. So this is important because like people will worry that they are learning this new language and they don't want to break stuff. They don't want to have a bad reputation. So if you have a good test suite, you will give them that safety net that they need to start contributing. And if they make some error or some rookie mistake, they have the tests to catch that. And yeah, this almost goes without saying, but test everything on a QA/pre-prod environment before going live. I've just put this here to highlight the fact that Elixir is a compiled language. So if you come from an interpreted language, such as Ruby or Python, you want this to test on a pre-prod environment so that you can fiddle with how do you compile and release your codes and learn how it works. Which is different than like interpret the language where you just ship it and it's running. So moving on to the second part of the adoption phase. So now that you have your application, your prototype running in production, how do you ensure that the code is consistent, you have consistent processes, and try to stop it from becoming a legacy app? So yeah, every application is doomed to be one if you don't take time, effort, and care to groom it. It will become a legacy application, and you'll find yourself a couple of years down the road trying to migrate this same application to another thing because this is just a mess. And yeah, this requires proactive and continuous work, so be diligent so that the code stays fresh and the coding stays fun. So yeah, this is how like companies like Rails LTS are born, because people just stay a lot of major versions behind, and yeah, that's definitely a problem. In the case of Elixir, it has some really good tools to help with this, to ensure that the code is consistent and that you try to avoid it from becoming a legacy application. So from Elixir 1.6 onwards, it ships with a formatter. So this is kind of there's a kind of a controversy because people don't like usually this kind of stuff. They want their own style. But that's kind of the point of the formatter, is that nobody gets exactly their own style. But as a community, you can just move forward and discuss the important bits and not like indentation or whatever. So there's also Credo, which is a linter, and it will like give you suggestions, and it's really cool because it, besides linting an error on a possibility for improvement, it will give you an explanation on that when you run it, which is very cool. There's also Dialyzer, which is like an optimistic type checker, so you can annotate your functions in Elixir with what we call type specifications. And Dialyzer will run through your code. And you, for instance, if you say that your function always takes an integer, Dialyzer will sometimes may catch that you are receiving a string here, whereas you said that it will always be an integer. So it may help you to find some like hard to find bugs. And lastly, there's doc tests, which I think is really cool as well. So in Elixir, you can embed tests inside your documentations, which will actually be run, and your build, your test will break if the documentation stays out of date. So I come from the Ruby world, and documentation is not seen as a thing that you should do, mainly because documentation will start to lie eventually. So the problem with documentation is that you put some documentation, the code will evolve at a different pace than the documentation, and then it will start to lie. So people just figured, why would you have it in the first place? In Elixir, this problem doesn't exist because you can embed examples of how your function runs. In this case, you embed this IEX, which is the Elixir REPL. So you state that when you call demo.hello, it should return world. And that's what this function is doing. So if this function stops doing that, your build will break, and you would need to update your documentation and be aware of it, which is very cool. So ensuring code consistency, I think that we need to let the computer do things that the computers are good at. So like checking for test coverage, like checking that the types are as they should, or implementing the tedious job of implementing a consistent style. And let your team focus on the issues that matter. So I think that code reviews are very important, and I personally really value them. And if your team doesn't spend time or energy focusing on the cosmetic and shallow aspects of code review, you will have much more energy to do a proper in-depth code review. So by offloading this work to a consistent process, you can just focus on what matters. So the last point of my presentation is around team building. So after your first prototype is a hit, you'll need to think about growing a team. So your first prototype delivers some promising results, and then you realize you or just two more developers know the language, and it's a problem that you and your whole organization need to fix. So I think there's two ways of fixing this problem: either hiring or training the people that you have in-house. For hiring, I don't have much to say other than like be present in the right communities and be active on them. Other than that, I don't have much to say about hiring. So I will focus the rest of the presentation on training in-house. This is the strategy, by the way, that all three authors of the book employed, and also at Onfido what we did. So we trained people on Elixir. This is not easy. It's a lot to take in. As I've said in the beginning, it's a different runtime and it's a different paradigm, but it's definitely possible. And at each step, you just need to do this organically and look for chances to pair review or mentor. So try to pair newcomers with experienced developers so that this knowledge exchange is as organic as possible and that everybody gets what they are doing. And another tip is like give ownership of simpler features to new developers, people that want to jump in. Just let them do the work end to end, because this way they will get their hands dirty. They will get the feel for the language, and yeah, it's a good approach, because it allows you to just see that person evolving, and then you can just review it on the PR. Just one of the options, another option that we have is to, and folks at the Bleacher Report did this, so they got the team a copy of Programming Elixir book and gave people some office time to go through them. So even like start a book club or something. We didn't do this at Onfido, but what we did is we started an Elixir Guild. So basically, Paulo started an Elixir Guild called Beam Me Up Scotty, and we met every like weekly or fortnightly. I think it was fortnightly, and it's just it's a safe space and a time dedicated to tinker with the language, learn how it works, and exchange knowledge. So I think a guild, not just an Elixir one, a guild in general is a really cool thing to have in a company. And yeah, when the project starts to hit production, this will likely spark enthusiasm and people will want to start to contribute. An application with the consistent style, so connecting this point with the previous one, an application with the consistent style will be easier for newcomers because they don't need to spend so much time like just checking how things work, because everything is different. And also, as I've said earlier, having a good test suite is also very, very important, so that newcomers can feel that they can jump in. Also, another important point is try to manage technology adoption by consensus instead of by decree. So do not focus solely on getting buy-in from management. Also try to get buy-in from the development teams around your company, so that it's more of an organic process, and yeah, it will people are excited about it and not forced to learn it. And this is almost a moot point, but just you don't need to train everybody at once. So this is a heavy investment that you're making. So you don't need to say jump every developer in a bandwagon and, hey, we'll all start learning Elixir now. A quote from the book, at Bleacher Report, they only had 2 to 4 full-time developers in the first year. So again, this takes time, but I feel it's an investment that you'll reap the rewards further down the road. And yeah, there's much more to adoption, like making the the transition to functional programming. There's a lot of things like when you want to use this in production, you'll start look at like distributed Erlang and Elixir, but that's more of the technical side of it, and I just focused on the not technical bits, as I feel that there's much content being produced on the technical side. Yeah, just to wrap things up, I've been talking about Elixir a lot, but most of the points that I've made here are common for every adoption. Just so wrapping it up, every adoption, I think, goes through, not necessarily, but can go through these stages. So first, start by building your business case. So either pick a part of your application that isn't working and extract it, or just build new applications from now on in this new language that you want, and make people understand why this is valuable and why they need to care about your idea. Create consistent processes around your language. As I've said, like this will ease your life and will allow you to have a lot of contributors to jump in. And yeah, make a plan to build or train your teams. So either hire people or just train them and invest in them. So yeah, just a quick shout out to all these people. So without their support and expertise and care, I certainly wouldn't be here giving this talk. And another shameless plug is I've written a book with my colleague Andre called Mastering Elixir. If you are into Elixir, check it out. And also another plug is the Lisbon Elixir meetup. So we have events every month where we discuss Elixir and all things related to it. So if you want, just show up. We'll have an edition next week on Wednesday. And that's it. Thank you. I'm open to questions now. Also, I will start to blog in this URL, so mainly about Elixir and sometimes Emacs stuff. But so right now you will just find an Nginx default page, but you'll see some content further down the road. Yeah, open to questions. No question. Cool. So thank you all for listening, and we can catch up afterwards if you want. Thanks.